Hello, everyone. LC Holt here. And this is my update for the week, January the 20th. And so today, we've kind of circled this airport a couple times. We've done
It's time to land the plane.
Time to land this sucker. We talked about in the past the actors who played Batman. And we did a show about the Joker in all his many incarnations.
Yep.
So now we're going to launch in and we're going to go deep on Batman. This time we're going to talk about the first two films in the Batman film series. The ones that were directed by Tim Burton, the great
Timothy Burton.
Timbo Burton. And because we did our Superman series.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
And so it seems justified that we covered the Man of Steel. Well, now we're going to cover The Dark Knight. Not the film. We're not there yet. We're going to cover the man, Batman. And we're going to start not long after the first Superman movie, the one that we both love, with Richard Donner directed, came out.
I thought you were about to say Quest for Peace, because it was just a few years after.
Yeah. Well, amazingly, the Batman film franchise had its roots in the late 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
That was when Benjamin Melniker and Michael Uslan, two producers, purchased the film rights from DC Comics to make a Batman movie on the heels of the success of Richard Donner's Superman. Mm-hmm. This was in 1979, a full 10 years before the film came to be. And what they wanted to do, especially Michael Uslan, was he wanted to make a dark, gritty Batman, as far away from the 1966 television series with Adam West and Burt Ward as you could get. And so at first, he went to a couple of Bond alums. Richard Maybaum, who, as a Bond fan growing up, if you liked Bond, you knew who Richard Maybaum was, because he wrote or co-wrote from the beginning just about all the Bond films up until really the late 80s. He was like the go-to Bond screenwriter. And so they wanted him to write the screenplay for Batman, and they wanted it to be directed by Guy Hamilton, who had directed Bonds and was also famously the original director, remember, on Superman, the motion picture.
Yeah.
He was the one that did all the early tests of Superman flying and stuff, where it was just like they shot an action figure out of an air cannon, and they had Superman running, and then he turned into an animation and then took off.
Yeah.
Remember when they were trying to figure out how is Superman going to fly?
And Donner's like, you spent all of that money on this.
That's right. And then Hamilton couldn't even direct the movie because he had tax problems in England. So I guess by 1979, those tax problems had been resolved, because that's who they wanted to direct the film and Maybaum write it. Both Maybaum and Guy Hamilton were like, no. Surprisingly, they didn't even consider it. They heard Batman and they ran for the hills.
They were thinking camp, probably.
Probably so, because at this time, if you thought about Batman, you always thought about Adam West.
Yeah.
Because that's really there were the serials.
Yeah, but those were so far out of.
Yeah, we're talking 40s there. And so you didn't have any kind of real idea of Batman as a serious, even in after Superman was taken seriously. You didn't really know because of the TV show. But anyway, November of that year, 79, John Peters and Peter Guber joined as producers. Now, John Peters, as we discussed on a previous show, was Barbra Streisand's hairdresser. Well, he had started that way. And then I love Kevin Smith when he was talking about John Peters in his Superman monologues. He said that John Peters, just in Hollywood, you fail upwards. So John Peters was started as a hairdresser and just failed up into being a producer. But that's kind of harsh. I wouldn't really go that far. But they joined the film. And over the course of all these months, the original producers, Uslan and them, were trying to get a studio interested in producing this Batman movie. Columbia Pictures said, hell no. They were like Maybaum and Guy Hamilton. United Artists were like, hell no. We're busy trying to figure out this whole Heaven's Gate thing.
Yeah, we're not into shark repellent.
We're just trying to stay afloat. Universal was not interested, but Warner Brothers, the home of Superman, the movies, they said, okay, yeah, we'll try that. And I think John Peters and Peter Guber coming on as producers helped instill a little bit of confidence.
Yeah.
Because Warner Brothers was willing to fork out $15 million on this movie nobody else wanted to produce. So they seemed to at least see the potential in this comic book thing, as they probably would because, Superman. And so continuing this sort of Superman thread, Tom Mankiewicz, who was the writer who rewrote Superman, the motion picture, and Superman 2 for Richard Donner. They thought, well, he wrote Superman, so therefore, let's get him as our writer, and that's what they did. But we're going from 79 to 83 now, because Mankiewicz turned in his script in 1983. So already this has been brewing for a while. And I'll give you kind of the basic overview of Mankiewicz's script. He had Batman and Robin, their origins, both of them. And the villains were going to be the Joker and Rupert Thorne, who, is lesser known, but he's sort of a gangster type guy. And the romantic interest was going to be Silver St. Cloud from the comic books. So that was Mankiewicz's sort of cast list. And he was going to also have a cameo by the Penguin. And instead of having the Penguin be, the idea that Mankiewicz had was the Penguin would be like a gangster who was cold-blooded.
Okay.
So he had to be in cool environments or else it would have an adverse effect. So that was his idea for bringing the Penguin into like the real world milieu.
Okay.
But again, that was only going to be a cameo. They got a couple directors that were hot at the time in the early 80s. One of the first ones they approached was Ivan Reitman, who was yet to do Ghostbusters, but was already kind of a known entity for some of the other comedies he did. And Ivan Reitman, tell me what you think of this. Remember, this is pre-Ghostbusters.
Okay.
Ivan Reitman considered Bill Murray as Batman. You don't think so?
No.
That's probably one of the oddest choices.
He loved his Bill Murray, though.
He did love Bill Murray, but that was what Ivan Reitman was thinking for Batman. And then they also went to Joe Dante, who would eventually become famous for directing The Gremlins and one of my all-time favorites, The Burbs.
The Burbs.
Which we're going to do a whole show on The Burbs, believe you me. We'll get there. But as they were going through these directors, Warner Brothers started bumping up based on the Mankiewicz script, started bumping up this budget and wound up at $20 million. So they seemed to be liking what they were seeing. And they were thinking about releasing it the summer of 1985, if all went to plan. Naturally, all did not go to plan because it wasn't released. And then that brings us to the man himself, Timothy Burton.
Timothy Burton.
Who had directed this movie, Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
I thoroughly enjoyed the first one.
I mean, I'm not a huge Pee-wee fan.
I like Pee-wee. I was a Pee-wee fan growing up. I had the Playhouse. I had the action figure.
It was big. It was a big deal.
I loved the show. I loved that movie. Now, when Big Top Pee-wee came out, I was a little sad.
That was post-Burton.
Yeah, it wasn't, wasn't nearly as...
Well, this Pee-wee's Big Adventure came out in 85. So that was the year Batman was supposed to come out. Obviously, it didn't because they hadn't found a director by then. So for some reason, John Peters and Peter Guber apparently saw Pee-wee's Big Adventure and thought, well, that's our Batman. It's all, you have to love these producers because sometimes this works
In this case, it did.
Yeah, but other times it doesn't really work because they come at it from this weird angle.
Yeah.
It's like what we talked about with John Peters when he was trying to cast Batman. He said Sean Penn is Batman because I just saw, or not Batman, Superman. Sean Penn is Superman because I just saw Dead Man Walking, and that man has the eyes of a killer. And you go, what are you talking about? This doesn't make any sense in context of this thing. But anyway, they saw Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and they thought, well, this is our Batman director.
Because Pee-wee's so dark.
Yeah. And they thought about, and they hired him to do some development stuff. But the movie wasn't a go yet. Because I think Warner Brothers were like, Pee-wee, what, Batman? This guy's just like, this is his first feature? What are we doing? And so, but Tim Burton, when he started working on the script with them, looked at it and didn't like Mankiewicz's script. Not unusual for Tim Burton. He's not really shy about looking at a script and going, I don't like this.
I didn't do it.
Yeah, this isn't I don't dig it. And also Tim Burton has been very adamant about the fact he wasn't a comic book fan.
Yeah.
But he did, when he was thinking about doing Batman, he started looking at some of the kind of modern comics at the time. And two things that Burton really latched onto were The Dark Knight Returns, the comic book, which he liked, and The Killing Joke. And he liked the mode of those movies in those comics because they were very dark and very serious and gritty. And Tim Burton said, that's the kind of Batman movie I want to do. And he just didn't think Mankiewicz's script was up to like The Dark Knight Returns level or The Killing Joke level.
Yeah.
So, one of the big things that Burton said was, I think that there are too many characters. So he removed almost instantly the Robin character because he didn't like the idea of Batman and Robin. He wanted it to be Batman. And he also removed the Penguin's cameo. And so Mankiewicz was like unceremoniously sort of brushed out of this whole thing by Tim Burton. And Tim Burton brought on a guy who was a comic book fan, a guy named Sam Hamm. It's his real name, Sam Hamm. And he hired him to rewrite the script.
Did he eat green eggs?
Was he from Whotown? Whoville or whatever? And one of the things Sam Hamm said, let's not get all bogged down in this origin stuff.
Yeah.
He wasn't really digging the whole idea of Batman's origin. Like we'll show that in like a flashback, but let's like get into Adventure Time.
Let's just cut to the chase. We're in the middle. He's Batman.
He's already Batman. Yeah. And that was Sam Hamm's approach. And he also didn't like the Silver St. Cloud love interest. So from Mankiewicz's script, so he removed that and he replaced Silver with Vicky Vale. And Sam Hamm, as he was writing, he also wound up replacing Rupert Thorne with a character that he created himself called Carl Grissom, who was not a comic book character, but it was a Sam Hamm creation. And so they had the script going, but the movie didn't get greenlit until Tim Burton made a very successful motion picture called Beetlejuice in 1988. And that movie, I remember when Beetlejuice came out, my sister went to see it in the theater and came back and said, this is the most bizarre, it's really good, but it's the most bizarre movie I've ever seen. And I remember this very vividly, because I was a kid. And then I didn't see Beetlejuice in the theater.
I think we rented it when it came out on VHS, if I remember correctly. I remember us all watching it. And I remember enjoying it as a kid, but
yeah, I think I was the same way. I was right at video time. I watched Beetlejuice, and I still love Beetlejuice. It's just one of those movies that it's like the early Tim Burton. When you look at it and you go, this is so bizarre and this should not work, but it really works.
I'm really surprised that, I know I'm skipping ahead, that the studio didn't insist that Michael Keaton be cast as the Joker. just from the Beetlejuice.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah,
Um,
because you could, if you go, it's not a hard leap from Beetlejuice to the Joker.
And I'm always surprised they haven't brought him back as the Joker in his later years. You know, kind of like a fan service thing.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Keaton as the Joker. He did Beetlejuice.
Yes, he did Beetlejuice. And like I say, Beetlejuice and the Joker aren't that far apart. Both makeup roles.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of look similar. But then again, you know, it's the Tim Burton thing. So everybody has to be like stark white.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like what Johnny Depp did later on, where every role he did for a Tim Burton movie, he looked exactly the same.
He did.
He would just paint him white, Tim Burton says. And so that's what they did, with black circles around his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Burton loves that look. So maybe that's why he liked the Joker. Burton was like, "Oh, he's already stark white."
Yeah, with some circles.
But it's a good thing, probably, that they waited to see if Beetlejuice would be a success, because that's the first time Burton and Keaton worked together. And so we may have not had Michael Keaton as Batman had they not worked already on Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
Because almost immediately, Tim Burton was all about Michael Keaton being Batman.
He does that. He does seem to attach himself to an actor.
Yeah, and it's almost always not someone you would immediately imagine.
Yeah.
Like Nick Cage as Superman,
Yeah.
as we talked about on another show. You go, what?
Yeah.
And then you go, well, Tim Burton, I mean, Beetlejuice is like, he made that work and it's great. So maybe he knows how to just make these things work. Because a lot of the fans, when they heard about, you know, when they finally did cast Michael Keaton as Batman, there were like,
Mr. Mom as Batman?
Exactly. 50,000 protest letters were sent in by fans. And this is back in the day when you had to write a letter. It's no email.
Yeah, there was no trolling on the internet.
No, so it's long before the internet.
Could you imagine what probably wouldn't have gotten made by studios if the internet had existed back then? Because they do, I mean, you could look at Star Wars. You know, it does seem that Disney did kind of, particularly the past one, it was kind of like, oh God, we've pissed them off, or let's try to appease here, there, and there. I mean, do you think that that's...
We're very lucky that the internet didn't exist in the 80s, I think, because we probably wouldn't have gotten a lot of this thing. And Logan, hey man, how you doing? Saying hey to us over on the chat. But let me talk about some of the casting choices pre-Michael Keaton before we get there. I'm going to throw these names out there, and you tell me what you think of these names. Mel Gibson, 80s Mel Gibson, pre-crazy. Well, he's probably already crazy, but nobody knew it. As Batman.
I don't know. I'd have to see it.
I mean, I can see him physically.
Yeah.
Like, he matches the physical thing.
So I'd have to see it.
Kevin Costner.
No.
We had the biggest Kevin Costner fan in the world sitting next to me. I knew the answer to that one. Here's a little connection.
Go dance with your wolves. Stay away from the bats.
Here's a little connection to Indiana Jones. Tom Selleck.
Not as Batman.
Because you know that he would have had the mustache.
Yeah.
You know, it's just because when you think of Tom Selleck in the 80s,
that would have given away his identity.
Yeah.
Like, who else has such a rocking mustache in town? It's obviously Bruce Wayne.
Yeah. Over in our chat, Logan made an interesting point. He said that Kevin Costner would be a good Gordon. Now, that I could see.
Yeah.
I could see Kevin Costner as Gordon with that sort of steel, laconic thing that Kevin Costner does.
He would have been a younger Gordon at that point.
Yeah, he would have been kind of like the Batman Begins Gordon, I guess. Okay, Harrison Ford. No Harrison Ford for Batman.
And I like Harrison Ford.
Oh, I know.
Say he knows.
No.
No, I don't think so. No.
Yeah, that's sort of like kind of like a personality thing.
Yeah.
Like in terms of personality, I don't really see the.
Because someone once told me, they said Harrison Ford just does Harrison Ford on film. He doesn't really. He kind of does his swagger. It's kind of like John Wayne. It's a John Wayne movie. You're going to see John Wayne.
And that's sort of Kevin Costner, too.
Yeah.
Because Kevin Costner isn't necessarily known for his range. Yeah. I mean, he's known for this Kevin Costner thing. Well, what about Dennis Quaid?
No.
Yeah, that's an odd one. It's not it's not like in Bill Murray land.
That's true.
But I wouldn't think Dennis Quaid.
So far, Mel Gibson is your best choice.
But it does sort of give you an idea of who was famous in the late 80s,
Yeah.
like who was on the A list of guys.
Yeah.
Because if you think a few years later, like Tom Selleck would never be on that list.
No.
Just only a few years later.
Yeah.
Obviously, some of these people would be on it regardless, probably because like Mel Gibson would be on it and Harrison Ford or whatever, But Tom Selleck is like, it's the 80s.
No Tom Cruise?
There was no Tom Cruise. No Tom
did I
Cruise.
make that face?
Oh,
Sorry.
but here's an interesting one.
Yeah.
And this is something I never knew about until I was doing research. But somebody the producers really wanted was Pierce Brosnan, who was Remington Steele.
Yeah, I loved him in Remington Steele, man. My mom and I loved that show.
And the famous story is, and if we ever do a James Bond show, which knowing how big a fan I am, the chances of that
and I've told you we need to do them.
Yes, and the chances are very, very good that I will do a James Bond show.
We'd have like a long series.
I tell you what, that's going to be epic. So just hold on to your potatoes, Dr. Jones. But Pierce Brosnan, as much as he wanted to be James Bond, turned down the opportunity to even audition for Batman. He just simply was not interested in Batman for whatever reason.
He could have been the first English Batman.
He could have been, yeah. But I thought that was an interesting casting choice. Pierce Brosnan as Batman. We're talking 80s Pierce Brosnan, young.
I would have liked to seen that audition.
That would be interesting because I can kind of see that. It would be different, but that's not often left field, He definitely would have had to lose the accent. Yeah. I mean, he had to be American.
Yeah.
I mean, Batman has to be American. Now, when they cast Michael Keaton, and there was such a backlash against this, because as you were saying, Mr. Mom, etc., Bob Kane, the creator of Batman, well, at this time he was the creator of Batman. He's really the co-creator because Bill Finger was still getting the finger at this point.
Yeah.
He was brought on as a consultant. So to tell the fans, it's okay. Bob Kane likes this. Michael Keaton will be fine. But so that was that. I don't know how much we're going to go into the casting of the Joker because we actually did a whole show in which we talked about some of the great people who were up for the Joker, like Tim Curry and David Bowie and John Lithgow, who famously turned it down because he didn't get it.
See, I would love to see David Bowie in a Bond film.
Oh,
Bond villain.
He would be
He even had a song that was perfect for a title. The Man Who Sold the World. I'm sorry. Okay, let's keep going.
But so Jack Nicholson was the first choice of the studio to play the Joker. And he was hired. He actually took a cut in pay from $10 million, which was Jack's standard, down to $6 million. But
back end.
The deal was he got back end in merchandising he got top billing. Was
he good friends with Alec Guinness?
I don't know.
Did they have a talk? Did they chat about this? Did Alec say, dude, back end is where it's at on these movies?
But I know that Jack Nicholson later had a chat with his buddy Danny DeVito and had that very talk with him. Because come to find out, Jack Nicholson made a hella deal by cutting his salary almost in half because he made far more than $10 million.
Yeah.
I mean, he made, as some reports are upwards of $90 million for merchandising back end and the upfront salary on this first Batman movie.
Yeah.
Now, the character of Vicky Vale was originally cast with an actress named Sean Young.
I was Blade Runner, right?
It's Blade Runner, yeah.
Wonderful in Blade
Runner. Wall Street.
Yeah.
She was in a lot of stuff. And she's crazy as hell, but she was very popular in the 80s.
Gorgeous.
Very pretty. Had an interesting way about her, had a toughness to her. She was speaking of Kevin Costner, she was in that movie No Way Out with him and Gene Hackman. So she was doing a lot of really interesting stuff, and she was kind of a tough character.
Did she date Burton? Did they date? No,
I don't
don't
think
know.
so.
Okay,
No.
I don't know. I was just wondering.
No, and I'll tell you why when we get to Batman Returns.
I was just wondering because she was such a cuckoo bird. And I remember, wasn't she on Joan Rivers dressed as Catwoman at one point?
Let's get to that. We're not there yet.
Okay. Cuckoo.
So Sean Young was originally cast as Vicky Bell. She fell off a horse, broke her arm in a nutshell, and had to be replaced at the very last minute.
That sucks.
With Kim Basinger. You know that sucks because that's a huge paycheck. And basically, she probably, knowing Sean Young, she probably bought a gun, went to the stable, and shot the horse. I mean, I'm not saying she did that, so don't get nuts. This has been a legal disclaimer, in my opinion.
To quote Bruce Wayne, well, he says, let's get nuts.
Yeah.
You say not get nuts.
She got nuts.
Yes.
She was nuts. Anton Furst was hired as the production designer, and his idea for the Tim Burton Batman, which Tim Burton is a designer. Like, he likes to draw sketches of characters. He's really into the design of things. And if you don't, watch any Tim Burton movie and that's
does he
obvious.
hang out with Ralph McQuarrie on the weekends?
Well, I don't know, but I'll tell you, you cannot mistake a Tim Burton movie for someone else's based mainly on the design.
Yes.
Like,
You're going to have that stripy worm in it.
And curly cues. And every movie has the branches of trees are like curly cues.
Yeah.
And, you know it's Tim Burton. Well, Anton Furst, he had this idea of doing a bleak and very ugly, his words, cityscape. His idea for Gotham was it was almost like everybody had a different architectural style. There was no city planner. Like, he wanted Gotham to look like, and this was Anton Furst's idea, that hell had erupted from the pavement and just continued to grow. So the idea is not to do a realistic city, but to do a city that looked like some sort of a strange mixture of architecture that didn't work together. So it's almost like you go to Gotham, and when you look at it, you know something's off balance here. Mm-hmm. And Tim Burton loved that idea. And then you had Bob Ringwood, who was the costume designer, and he made... his job was basically to make Michael Keaton look intimidating, because Michael Keaton is an average-sized guy with an average-sized build. And so he worked with Tim Burton on the design of the bat suit. And Tim Burton's big thing was he wanted it to be all black, because famously, comic book Batman is in gray and blue. And some of the fans reacted poorly to that initially, but I think we both like that suit, right?
Yeah.
Because it's an unusual approach, not really in hindsight, because they all look like that afterwards.
Wait a minute, let me do impersonation.
That's right, because his neck was so tight with that cowl. If you notice in the first quite a few movies, Michael Keaton couldn't turn his head.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just not great for fighting.
No.
In fact, they even made a point of saying that in one of the, because his head couldn't turn even in the Christopher Nolan, the first one. Okay. It wasn't until The Dark Knight that Batman could turn his head. And they made a point in The Dark Knight, remember, where Christian Bale says something about, it'd be really useful in these fights if I could turn my head.
Yeah.
So, they eventually solved that problem way into the whole deal, But they were deciding they were going to film this movie, as many movies were filmed, at Pinewood Studios. It seems like every movie we've talked about on this show was at Pinewood, which is in England. They had 18 sound stages in which they could build Batman shit, and 95 acres of backlot. And this movie, and in watching the movie again, I have to admit, the movie has a very stagey feel.
It does.
You never think that you're out in the open, world. Everything feels like it's on a stage.
Yeah.
Part of that was necessitated by the fact that they're trying to keep it secret. They couldn't just go out in the street and start shooting, because you would have paparazzi and people. It's a big part of this was the secrecy.
People protesting, my poor Michael Keaton, trying to say his line.
Yeah. And the thing about Tim Burton was he later said it was torturous. All the secrecy on this movie and the fact they had to be so careful about shooting everything at Pinewood, he said it made the filming of the first Batman movie very, very difficult for him. Because he was trying to make a movie and everybody was concerned with, don't let anybody see anything, It was very distracting. He brought in another writer, one of his Beetlejuice writers, to redo some of the script from Sam Hamm's version. And Sam Hamm has been very vocal in the years since to say stuff like, a lot of that was written on the day because they were trying to solve basic script problems, and they were trying to kind of condense things. because I remember the big one Sam Hamm always points out is he says, I would never have written a scene where Vicky Vale is led into the Batcave by Alfred, which famously happens in the movie. Just out of nowhere, Alfred decides to let Vicky Vale into the Batcave. Yeah. That's a big pet peeve for Sam Hamm, because he said, I would never write that because it doesn't make any sense. Because he's credited as the script, his big thing is, people think I wrote that.
Yeah.
And he goes, I didn't write that, I promise. Now, John Peters, who is always a very hands-on producer, was very into the climax of this movie being spectacular. Because remember when we were talking about Superman with the giant spider? Mm-hmm. John Peters gets these ideas in his head and you can't get away from it. And Tim Burton is not established enough yet to say, John, that's a crazy idea. So John Peters says, no matter what, I don't care what the script says. At the end of this movie, it's going to take place at the top of the world's largest cathedral. And they're going to be in this bell tower. And Tim Burton's like, okay. And so he couldn't get Peters off of this. So they had to design the world's tallest cathedral for the ending of the movie because John is really into this. Which is in Gotham. Right, yeah, which is, must be a very religious town, just from the looks of it. The fact that it's almost never daytime. In fact, when they were shooting, the climax was still up in the air. And Jack Nicholson, when they were shooting the scene where he's taking Vicky Vale up the stairs, he turned to Tim Burton at one point and he said, so why are we walking up all these stairs? And Tim Burton didn't know because they hadn't written the ending yet. So he was like, I'll tell you when you get up there. So, they were still trying to kind of put this thing together. But Peters eventually got his bell tower climax. And I think it works. It's not one of those things where you go, well, that seems tacked on, It is kind of odd that the Joker would just decide to walk up all those stairs. But, he's trying to get to his helicopter.
That's right. And you kind of accept it. He's Cuckoo Bird, so.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the helicopter.
He's being dramatic. I don't know.
It can't land in the streets. These buildings are very close together.
That's right.
So you have to go to the world's largest cathedral. Now, another interesting point about all this is, you think back to the late 80s, because this is like 1988, 89 when they're shooting this. Burton wanted to hire a guy who had composed his previous two movies to do the score for Batman, a guy named Danny Elfman, famous for his band Oingo Boingo.
Yay!
And John Peters was like, Oingo what? Who?
Weird science.
Like, we need some damn. We need. This is absurd. We need John Williams. And Tim Burton was like, no, he's going to do a great job. Well, Peters wasn't convinced that Danny Elfman could do this big of a movie until he heard, because Burton was like, play him the march. And when John Peters heard the opening Batman theme, the Batman march, that's what sold him on Danny Elfman. Otherwise, Danny Elfman was about to get his Oingo Boingo ass fired.
He was going to have to get Oingo Boingo back together and do a weird science reunion tour.
That's right. It almost ended right there. And now you think about it and you go, well, I mean, Danny Elfman's Danny Elfman. Like, he's like one of the, top 2, 3, like him, John Williams, Hans Zimmer. I mean, Howard Shore, Mm-hmm. He's like one of those go-to guys. Alan Silvestri. I mean, they're all like the top 5. What? Carter Burwell, who is my personal favorite of composers. I love Carter Burwell, but side note. But Peters also came up with another one of these crazy ideas of his, and this I remember so vividly. He decided that this movie, why sell one soundtrack album by this Elfman kid when you could sell 2? We're going to have, no one's ever done that, but they've never had 2 soundtrack albums.
But we need to be a pop album.
That's right.
To get on that top 40 radio.
Because we're going to make some money with this shit.
It's going to be on Casey Kasem.
And so what was John Peters' idea? Prince. Makes no sense with Batman necessarily, but he's like, Prince.
And none of the other movies, I mean, the other Batman movies, they had people, but it wasn't like
Not like that. It wasn't like, let's have 2 different. Yeah. I mean, this was a big deal at the time to have 2 different And it was a money decision from John Peters, to have 2 different soundtrack albums. And I remember vividly, I had that vinyl. Prince did a whole album of songs based around Batman, some of which are actually in the movie.
Yeah.
In the museum scene, the Joker is dancing to Prince. At the very end of the parade, the Joker is dancing to... Joker dances to Prince a lot.
Well, he's
Joker's
the
a big
clown
Prince. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Joker is a big Prince fan.
Clown Prince of Crime.
And, we could probably do a whole show about just the Prince album, but we're not going to. But we will say...
Actually, we are. No, I'm kidding.
It was an incredibly successful soundtrack and an even more successful movie. I mean, this movie, made for its time in 1989, because it was released in June of 89, it made so much money. It made $750 million from merchandising alone. And everything had the bat symbol on it. Absolutely everything.
I had the cereal, and it came with a plastic Batman bank.
I had the cereal too, and my God, was that cereal hairy.
It wasn't
nasty.
Very good. It was like a very bad version of Captain Crunch. And I love Captain Crunch.
It was Captain Crunch with hair.
And no sugar, probably.
That fucking cereal had hair on it. It was the weirdest cereal, and it was nasty, but you got a cool box.
Yeah, and the bank. It was because the box was wrapped in plastic and the bank was attached. You didn't have to save the flipping, proofs of purchase and mail off. It was there when you bought it.
I remember a book that thick
of
merchandise from Batman.
Yeah.
They had a whole catalog you could buy, and then you would buy the shit in it. And it was like Batman marbles. It was Batman wristbands.
Batman was everywhere.
Everywhere. When they called it Batmania in the late 80s, they weren't lying. Because that bat symbol, which the studio decided to do that, I'm sure this was probably a Peters thing. Maybe Burton had something to do with it. But instead of using the logo that said Batman, what they decided to use as their primary marketing tool, as the head of their campaign, was the symbol, the bat symbol, black against yellow.
I had the nightlight.
They had everything. I mean, this thing was insane.
With the bat symbol. That was the nightlight, was the bat symbol.
And the first weekend of this movie, $2.2 million it made the first night. And then $40 million it made its first weekend. So 1989, amazing. It made over $400 million in its first run.
So the people that complained in their letters about Keaton, they were eating some crow.
Yes, they all went to see the movie, and they seemed to kind of like it because, like I said, over $411 million that movie made in its first run. It when it opened, it instantly bypassed the 2 other movies that had opened that year, who had all set records: Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Ghostbusters 2.
And that was a big summer.
Yes, because Indy made the first record, and then Ghostbusters 2 beat Indy's record, and then the very next week, Batman beat Ghostbusters 2's record. So it was a record-breaking summer.
Sadly, that summer, I remember my cousins would come into town and we'd go see a movie. And unfortunately, that summer we chose Ghostbusters 2.
Mm-hmm. Which I like Ghostbusters 2 myself. I mean,
look, I could have seen Last Crusade or Batman in the theater.
Yeah.
I would have rather seen one of those in the theater, in hindsight.
Surprisingly, I have very vivid memories of that summer because all 3 of those movies I saw in the theater.
See, you were lucky. I got to see one.
Yeah, I saw Indiana Jones, Ghostbusters 2, and Batman. And I tell you, when I saw first Batman, I have vivid memories of seeing this movie in the theater. In fact, I remember what theater it was. It was such an important movie for me, this first Tim Burton Batman. I remember what theater I was in. I remember who I was with. I remember, actually, I have vivid memories of sitting in the seat and watching, and I can picture the screen in my mind. I mean, that's how much this movie meant to me and stuck with me. Because, 1989, it's been a few years. But I still have very vivid memories of this. Warner Brothers were so blown away by this success that they paid $250,000 to take all those sets in Pinewood and store them. Because they were like, 1990, we're starting to shoot another one of these things. They were ready to go. Tim Burton wasn't quite so ready. He said, I don't know about a sequel, because this one was very difficult for me. And unless it's something new and exciting, I'm not really into the idea of doing another Batman. In fact, he went off and made a whole other movie, which was Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah.
Well, while he was making Edward Scissorhands, Warner Brothers were like going, okay, Sam, let's get a script going. And we're going to throw, when he finishes this Scissorhand movie, we're going to throw a script on his desk and he's going to be back. Believe you me. So they hired Sam Hamm to go ahead and start writing Batman 2, which is what it was called originally. And it dealt with, and Sam Hamm had Catwoman and the Penguin right from the jump as the two villains. And this script was indeed thrown down in front of Tim Burton and said, this is what we're going to do next. And Tim Burton looked at it and he said, well, I think this needs some work. And he had just seen that movie Heathers, Tim Burton had. And that was written by a guy named Daniel Waters. And Tim Burton really liked Heathers. So he was like, well, let's see if we can get this guy to rewrite the script. And so he hired Daniel Waters to rewrite Sam Hamm's script, which Sam Hamm's script had Robin in it. Because Sam was trying to get that Robin character in there. Daniel Waters rewrote the script as a political satire. His idea was to have, because, Heathers is satirical.
Yes.
So Daniel Waters is sort of in that mindset. His idea was to satirize politicians by having the Penguin run for mayor of Gotham. Which, when you say that, sounds a little silly. And in this script, there was a character that was introduced named Max Schreck. And he was going to be like this evil mogul that tries to help.
Not to be confused with Nosferatu.
Right, the other Max Schreck. That was trying to get the Penguin elected as mayor of Gotham. A billionaire. And in the script, Max Schreck and Penguin were going to be revealed to be brothers. Both from the Cobblepot family.
That would have been interesting.
And the idea was that Schreck was the golden boy who the parents kept. And the Penguin, Oswald Cobblepot, was the freak who came out looking like a monster and they threw him in the river.
Why didn't they keep that part?
I don't know, but that
would have been really, that makes sense now.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, that's really, I like that.
Yeah. Also, I think you'll like this. In the first Batman, Harvey Dent was played by Harvey Dent being the district attorney of Gotham City.
Billy D. Williams.
Was played by Billy D. Williams.
And he was supposed to finish it out, correct?
And, yes.
That was the plan.
And in this script for Batman 2, Billy D. Williams was going to be in there as Harvey Dent, as the main character. He was going to return from the first movie. And at the end of the movie, for those of you who, I can't say spoilers for a movie that came out in 1992. So I'm sure you all know. At the end of the movie, Catwoman has a taser, a handheld taser. And in the movie, she kisses Max Schreck with the taser between their mouths. And that's how Max Schreck dies. Well, in the original script, that was going to be Harvey Dent that she kissed with the taser. He didn't die, but half of his face was deformed. And that's how Harvey Dent was going to become Two-Face. Catwoman basically was going to make Harvey Dent into Two-Face at the very end of the movie.
That would have been interesting.
Which then would have led into Two-Face being in the next film.
I really wish they'd have let Billy D. Williams do the whole.
Oh, yeah. Because the whole idea, Tim Burton's idea was that was going to be, Billy D. Williams was going to be Two-Face. And the visual image of that, I would love to have seen.
Yeah.
I would love to have seen what Billy D. Williams would have looked like as Two-Face with a Tim Burton design. And primarily with a Tim Burton design. That's the key word.
I just think it would, I don't know. Maybe I just think it would have been really cool. It would have been good. Particularly compared to what we got, but.
Yeah, which we'll get into that on that when we talk about Joel Schumacher.
Yeah, but that was one thing I'm really sad about. We didn't get to see him.
Well, they got Michael Keaton back for Batman 2, which eventually was called Batman Returns. They offered him $10 million. And Michael Keaton was like,
our turn.
I'll be there. Even though he was not a big fan of the suit in the first one, not how it looked. But Michael Keaton is kind of claustrophobic. He didn't like being trapped.
Well, I'm sure you can't even turn your neck. You're like.
Yeah, and he also couldn't go to the bathroom either.
I was going to say that too.
They had to fix that. That was one of his demands. Is I need a zipper. And they gave him a zipper in Batman Returns. The person they didn't give a zipper was Catwoman, who was originally cast as Annette Bening. She was the original Catwoman. But Annette Bening got pregnant with Warren Beatty's child.
Damn it, Warren Beatty. What is wrong with you?
He fucked it up. Now we're going to get to what you mentioned before. Sean Young was pretty salty about the whole Vicky Vale, I broke my arm and I couldn't be in the first Batman. And she was bound and determined to be Catwoman in Batman Returns. So Sean Young put together, it's on video, you can find it. She dressed up in a homemade Catwoman costume and she stalked the hell out of Tim Burton. Remember how I said she was crazy before? Well, she got onto the Warner Brothers lot and she came busting into Tim Burton's office dressed as Catwoman. It was like jumping over the sofa and coming at him and shit. And Tim Burton was just like, oh my God, what security? He was not impressed. He was actually more scared than he was impressed by her devotion to the Catwoman character. So, needless to say, Sean Young didn't even get an audition. Like, Sean Young was
I just remember
thrown off the lot
as a kid seeing was the Joan Rivers show, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That famous clip. She's on there and she's dressed up as Catwoman. I remember as a kid watching, going, I'm very confused and I feel very embarrassed for this person.
It is embarrassing. It's very embarrassing because she's in full-on crazy mode and she's dressed as Catwoman and she's campaigning hard. And hey, bless her for her devotion.
Hey.
But it did not win over Tim Burton. Like I said, it scared him more than anything else. So instead, he met with a young actress who had been in several movies at this point, Lady Hawk, Scarface, named Michelle Pfeiffer. And after one sit-down meeting, he decided that Michelle Pfeiffer was right to replace Annette Bening as Catwoman. Danny DeVito was obvious. Like, Tim Burton, from the inception, said Danny DeVito is going to play Penguin. Because,
You're not going to find anybody else.
The way Burton drew the Penguin, because he did his own little character designs that were eventually made flesh in the movie, was he wanted Penguin to look like an egg with these little stick feet sticking down and a big old nose and, white-faced.
You just basically said that Danny DeVito looked like a little egg.
That's what he wanted. And they even had to make him look even more egg-like because they put Danny DeVito in this suit
yeah.
that made him look like a giant egg with the legs sticking down.
He was nasty in that movie.
And they made the he drooled. Tim Burton had this idea that Penguin had bile that was always coming up and out of his throat.
Yeah.
And so he always had this black drool running down.
It always looked like he was dipping snuff to me. When I was a little kid, I was like, does he dip snuff?
That's right. It did look like
Granny.
snuff. Yeah. Because, and you know what they did? They used blue Listerine and they put red and green food coloring in it. And that's it. And before he would do a take, Danny DeVito would take a little cup of this Listerine and put it in his mouth. And so when he talked, this black bile would come out.
At least his breath was minty fresh.
Oh, his breath was all kinds of fresh. And if he swallowed any of that shit, he was probably drunk by the end of the day because, it has alcohol. This was shot in Hollywood, not Pinewood. And it took up 80% of the Warner Brothers studio lot. Because, again, very stagey. It was all on stages.
Why didn't they go back to Pinewood?
I don't know. It's probably, I don't know. I have no idea. But they just chose to do it, which is kind of a crazy choice because it's a winter Christmas movie and it's freezing. They had to refrigerate the set for a multitude of reasons, mainly because they had live penguins on the set with the Eggman. And they refrigerated the sets down to 30 degrees. So you would walk from a 30-degree set inside out into the California heat. So, it added an expense because England is cold anyway.
Depending on what time of year you go.
And it was a lot of animal rights people talking about those live penguins that got a little up in arms because they were like, you're strapping rocket launchers to real penguins? What? But Tim Burton he's actually an animal guy. So he was very gentle with the penguins. He wanted to make sure they were comfortable. Much to the chagrin of people like Michelle Pfeiffer, because she was in this suit, this latex bodysuit, which was just a thin piece of latex and nothing else on 30-degree sets. So she was freezing. Not to mention the fact she couldn't go to the bathroom because they had to use talcum powder to squeeze her into this suit in the morning. So the only time she could get out of it was for lunch before they had to squeeze her back into it. So she had one opportunity. 12, 14-hour days, something like that. She couldn't. You
have to drink water, but I'm sure she probably didn't.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would be terrified too because you can't get out of that thing. I mean, what you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They made 660.
Well, if she peed on it, I mean, they could have just hosed her down.
I guess so,
Just,
yeah.
latex.
They made 60 of these costumes for her. And like I said, she was trapped in there for 12 to 14 hours a day. Bo Welch replaced Anton Furst as the production designer. He tried to keep that Batman Gotham City look, but it does look a little different.
It does. It looks a little more.
It's less Anton Furst in this one. It's a little brighter.
Yeah.
Which is odd because later they really protested how dark this movie was. And like I said before, Michael Keaton insisted that suit be lighter, thinner, and have something where you could go to the bathroom. So Michelle Pfeiffer was shit out of luck, but at least Michael Keaton could go to the bathroom.
And she's watching him go to the bathroom. You son of a...
You bastard. You bastard. They were rewriting the script extensively throughout the production of this movie. And it has the, I was telling you, up until the last minute, really, Harvey Dent was going to be in it. And while they were filming, they were supposed to be brothers. Max Schreck and the Penguin were going to be brothers. That was taken out while you were filming. So the movie even has it's like you were saying, it would have made more sense.
Yeah.
It even has a feeling like you can see that element is missing. It seems like it's leading up to something.
Decision? Was it Burton? Was it the studio? Was it just?
I think it was just the when you're making the movie itself, they're going through all these rewrites, and you know how it is. The producer says, "Let's take this out." So an actor doesn't want to do that. The director has second thoughts on this, and before you know it, things have been rewritten to the point where you're far from where you started without even trying to go there.
Yeah.
It's just from rewriting day after day after day. And Batman Returns, to me, especially in watching it again, has that rewritten as you're going feeling. Because there's a lot of lines in there that almost seem like placeholder lines, but they never replace them with anything better.
Yeah. Because
there are lines in Batman Returns, and I'm not trying to criticize the movie because I actually like Batman Returns. I think it has a lot of good stuff in it. But there are lines in it where you go, so was that just for the trailer or what? Because it makes no sense. Yeah. I mean, one of the ones that I always remember is when Batman and the Penguin first come face to face. And the Penguin out of nowhere says, you don't really think you'll win, do you? And Batman goes, things change. And within the context of the scene, you're like, what are you guys talking about? This doesn't make any sense. Like, huh? Things change. What do you... And there's another thing where Batman tells Alfred in one scene, because Alfred or Oswald Cobblepot, when you first are introduced to him, he seems like a good guy who was in bad circumstances. He's hiding the fact that he's truly evil with a master plan.
And Bruce Wayne's going, I hope he finds his family.
And he tells Alfred, I hope he finds his family. And then in the very next scene, they're at odds with each other.
Yeah.
And you go,
make any sense.
Okay, what? So it has that feeling of things being taken out, rewritten on the fly, and just never made better. Like, oh, God, we don't have time to finish the script. We got to shoot this scene. There's a lot of stuff like that in the movie. And I think as time goes on, you see those flaws in hindsight when you watch it. Penguin, another big thing why they were doing rewrites is in the script, Penguin didn't really have a master plan.
No.
So they had to come up with that. And the master plan isn't really all that good because it does feel tacked on.
Yeah.
Because his master plan is basically like this Moses thing where the firstborn of Gotham, he's going to kill them. He's going to drown them. And you go, what?
Why?
Yeah, where did that come from? But it came from the fact they didn't have the script finished and they were trying to figure out a master plan as they were going.
Kept with him and what's his face being brothers. That
probably would have solved a lot of the master plan thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, these are just some criticisms I have. They're kind of minor. Like I say, they're more glaring in hindsight. There are a lot of strange things with Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yes.
Because you don't know, is she supernatural? Because she gets pushed out the window by Max Schreck, and then all these cats come over and start nibbling on her.
And then she's like, Wah!
And she comes back to life, yeah.
And then she goes back home and like, I hate my girly apartment. my childish apartment.
And she has those that neon sign that says "Hello there" on her wall, and
Yes.
she knocks out the O and the T, and it says "Hell" here.
Yeah.
Which was an interesting detail, but at the same time, you go, why was that neon sign? Who has that in their bedroom?
I know.
Hello there to who?
And then she grabs one pleather jacket and
Yes.
it's like, I can make a whole suit out of this.
And she makes an entire suit out of one jacket. Now, you tell me how that works, and I'll give you 2 cents. But yeah, that's true. So there's things like that you don't really. They're ill-defined.
Yeah.
It seems like it would be a script meeting idea that would be later developed, but you never got to the later developed part.
We got to shoot it.
Yeah.
We're on schedule.
And then Penguin and Catwoman team up, and
That
you just
doesn't
kind of
make sense.
doesn't really make a lot of sense why they're teaming up. And then they break up, and then
But they hated each other the whole time.
yeah. So it's a lot. Like I say, it's a lot of ill-defined.
And you
type
wonder
script
why
stuff.
does she? What is their beef with Batman? I don't understand it. They just hate him.
That's never really defined.
We don't like him. Why?
It's like, why does Batman suddenly not like the Penguin?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, we understand why Joker hates him.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So I don't know. But that was just some kind of minor criticisms. Danny Elfman did return. He returned along with Batman to do this thing, and it almost ended his relationship with Tim Burton.
oh wow, did not know that.
Yeah, because they were simultaneously working on a stop motion animation project called The Nightmare Before Christmas. And between the two of those, they were having a lot of tension with one another. And I think mainly it came from Nightmare Before Christmas. For whatever reason, they were not getting along. And so after Batman Returns, they ceased collaborating for a short time. And I say for a short time because, they made up because they've been working together ever since Ed Wood. But on Ed Wood, Tim Burton hired Howard Shore to do the score for that. Try saying that fast. Hired Howard Shore to do the score. I should get an Academy reward.
It's a new theater camp tongue exercise.
Yeah, it's a tongue twister. This movie was released June 19th of 1992 and made $45 million its opening weekend, which was more than Batman, but it made less ultimately in the long run. It made basically little more than half of what the original Batman made, because I said Batman made over 400 million. This made like 266 million.
What did they? Why do you think it made less?
Protesting.
Yes.
There was a huge backlash against Batman Returns, and I remember this.
I do too.
There were Donahue shows about this. I remember that vividly because parents took their children to see Batman Returns, and they said, "Oh, my lands. This is far too violent for my child."
What was the first one? He's gassing an entire city.
Yeah, and Batman, later with the Nolan movies, there's a lot made about Batman not killing people. In these movies, Batman's got no problem taking a motherfucker out. He kills people all the time if they're bad guys.
I remember in Returns, what was it? The guy was beating him up, the big guy, and then he kind of does that smile, like, heh, 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 and it's the bomb or something.
Yes.
Remember that?
He throws him in the sewer and it explodes. He blows the guy up.
And just the look on his face, he's like,
yeah, he's happy about that.
I'm going to blow you up.
Right.
And that's Batman.
He kills him. And he does a lot of shooting with it. He has Tommy guns on his Batmobile.
But the thing is about those films is that they're very comic-y, cartoony, the violence, in a way.
Yeah.
That I remember when I saw it as a kid, I wasn't scared or anything or thought, oh God, this is too intense. So crying out loud, of course, my parents were pretty cool. They let me watch RoboCop. If they're gonna let me watch RoboCop, they obviously was like, Batman Returns is like a Disney film, whatever.
Yes.
So they never cared about it. They weren't one of those kind of parents.
Because RoboCop has some serious violence in that. I mean, you think Batman Returns is intense? Watch RoboCop.
And they later sold action figures for RoboCop.
Yeah. RoboCop had tie-ins. In fact, one of the big things about this protest is McDonald's pulled out their Happy Meal promotion for Batman Returns.
I was kind of pissed. I wanted some of those toys.
Yep, and it's all because parents protested this idea
bad parents
of Batman Returns being far too violent for children. I mean, when I watched it not too long ago, I looked at it, I was like, there's some intense stuff. But even as a kid, I didn't It didn't. I guess maybe because the penguin was kind of scary looking and he drooled. And I don't know.
I just thought it was snuff when I was a kid. I was like,
Yeah.
really dip snuff.
Yeah, I guess some
Just
people,
like great granny.
unlike us, did not have grandparents that did that.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So in other parts of the country. A lot of people criticized the movie, and I'm not talking about parents, I'm talking about critics, because they made fun of the fact that Tim Burton wasn't known as an action director. And some critics said Tim Burton couldn't direct action to save his life. He was too into the wintry weirdness and the motif of freaks versus freaks. They were like, he's all into this freaks versus freaks thing, but he can't direct an action scene. Never really struck me as being a big issue. I never thought about Tim Burton's lack of. He seemed fine to me. I mean, yes, it's not Die Hard, but
No.
I mean, that's obviously an action director, John McTiernan.
Yeah.
But it never really bothered me. I never saw
We saw some fights. We were fine.
Yeah, I didn't have any sort of criticism about his lack of being an action director. I mean, of course he's not an action. He's Tim Burton. I mean, and look at his career. He's not known for doing he never made a Die Hard movie,
No.
But the closest to action he made were these Batman movies. And something like Planet of the Apes or something like that.
But you also think of Batman. You don't think of comic book films as action films. Usually, I know they have action in them, but usually, people say Superman, the Marvel films. I don't think, this is an action film. When someone says action film, I think Die Hard, and Arnie movies,
Sylvester Stallone, stuff like that.
That's an action film.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
This is a comic book film.
Well, unfortunately, the WB, Warner Brothers, took all of this criticism from parents and from critics to heart. And they were so hot and heavy about him coming back, Tim Burton, to do Batman Returns. Tim Burton sat down for a meeting about doing another Batman movie, Batman 3. And basically, he said within a few minutes of that meeting beginning, he got the impression that he was persona non grata. Because Burton threw out a couple ideas for what he would like to do for Batman 3. And Warner Brothers, I guess, reacted very coolly to it. Because right on the heels of this backlash from Batman Returns, and Burton said he walked out of that meeting and he was like, okay, I'm done. Like, okay, you don't want me, I'm fine. So he went off and did other stuff. And that was the end of Tim Burton's involvement with Batman. It is kind of sad.
Very sad, particularly since we now know where the series would go.
Yes, and we'll do another show. We'll continue this Batman series with.
So the next one's going to be depressing.
The next one's going to be. We're going to have a lot to talk about when we deal with the Joel Schumacher years.
I'm still so disappointed about Billy D. Williams.
And that's something Tim Burton wanted to do in the third Batman movie. So we'll never see because Warner Brothers was like, "Get the hell out of here, you freak!" And. Tim Burton, I can kind of understand. He didn't want to be somewhere where he wasn't wanted. But anyway, that wraps up our show about Batman, the Tim Burton years.
Batman Returns, the ultimate Christmas movie.
Yeah, that's for sure. Wintry weirdness. Batman Returns, wintry weirdness.
I do know someone, they do watch it around Christmas. Usually around November. They're like, okay, it's getting close to Christmas. Let's watch Batman's Returns.
Well, you can watch a lot worse movies at Christmas than Batman Returns. That's for sure. Just turn on the Hallmark Channel.
That's true. Or the Netflix Christmas movies.
But we do appreciate you checking out the show. Yeah. And we'll see you next week.
And let's say hi one more time to our.
Oh, yes. And Logan, thanks for participating so much in the show. Thanks for watching, Logan, and all the rest of you guys. And until next week, we will see you. Take care of yourselves.